Oh, we're getting pretty good at this, huh? This is episode 3. Hello, hello.
Hey, what's going on, man?
Yes, episode 3. Like I said, this is the third installment of Foreign and Domestic Unfiltered. Hell of a week for spectacle politics, for sure.
Yes.
Obviously, one of the topics that we're going to jump into is the political theater that is the impeachment of Donald Trump, part 2.
our favorite big wet boy.
Yeah, and you know, when we started this, one of the things that I didn't want to talk about extensively was Donald Trump. Mm-hmm. Just because, it's almost an aversion tactic to actually talking about real issues at times, because it's such a billboard of a media suck of energy.
Yeah, he's a black hole of politics.
He is. And, we'll obviously get into that. We want to talk about the recent ICC ruling that they are going to actually look to prosecute Israel for war crimes. They do have jurisdiction. So that was kind of what they, deliberated on this week.
And vice versa. They
Yeah.
want to prosecute some Palestinians possibly as well.
Yep.
And
Hamas.
Yep.
Which, that's a really interesting topic to look at. Anybody should be looking at it. But for me personally, there's a lot of parity between the struggle in Israel and Palestine and what happens in Northern Ireland and kind of what went on there with the occupation of the north of Ireland. So that's been something that I've looked at quite a bit over my venture into geopolitics and local politics. But before we do that, we'll do what we normally do, which is get into some quick hits for the week. Ramon, do you want to lead us off with your first quick hit of the week?
All right, yeah. I wasn't going to do this one first, but I think the second one will lead into the opening topic for the domestic better. So let's kick off with our boy Andrew Cuomo. I'm sure
Lord Cuomo.
Prince or King. So I'm sure everybody's seen it. It's been in the news quite a bit now for the last 5 days. It turns out our boy Cuomo was, as they say in The Wire, juking the stats. Didn't release the full numbers of nursing home deaths through the course of the pandemic. This is sort of becoming like another one of the, red pom-pom, blue pom-pom issues where Republicans and Democrats are going at it on, just dividing line, and no one wants to be objective about it, which is a huge issue for me. But the biggest thing for me on this is the fact that if you read into these articles, first of all, it was one of his close aides. I can't remember her name. I don't even know what position she held, but one of his top aides basically had a conversation that she had with some other folks about this exact topic leak into the media, where she was saying that they were withholding some of the numbers from nursing home deaths for fear of federal investigation from the Trump administration. So now here's my thing, right? So you guys know me. I'm always looking for what's the angle. I'm looking for the inside politics of it all, because a big part of talking about politics in general is sort of having the understanding that a lot of what goes on with influence peddling amongst journalists and politicians and their staff, bureaucrats, administrative folks, is sometimes things will get leaked into the media that they want to be leaked so that there's a way they can spin it, or there's some way that it might be perceived rather than what the actual situation was. Mm-hmm. And this sort of smacks of that to me, because in no way is that a real excuse to say, I lied. We lied as an administration. We lied about the numbers of nursing home deaths because we were afraid Trump was going to prosecute us. Mm-hmm. To me, that is, they're throwing that little signal up to Democrats unite. You know what I mean? That's what that sounds like to me. And that's basically in effect what it's been. Mm-hmm. It's concerning, because on top of the fact that there was the actual manipulation of numbers going on across the period of, I believe it was from the July through December numbers of 2020, the bigger issue for me is, I have here in a report, Cuomo actually was ducking a FOIA request from some conservative think tank that was trying to get the actual numbers for some things that they were trying to write in the media about it. So for me, that right there, that's the smoking gun. Like if you're in the executive, and whether it be the federal, the state, or the local part of government, and you have FOIA requests, I mean, those things are pretty serious. Like, you can get thrown in prison for violating the Freedom of Information Act statutes. you have to provide the information that's being requested from you from a journalistic body within a certain period of time, and you have to prove that you've exhausted all efforts to find that.
Freedom of Information Act.
Yeah, it's super important. It's a building block of our democracy, folks. It doesn't seem like it's a super wonky thing, but it's actually very important. It's honestly a big part of the way that we found out a ton of stuff about the Trump administration. A lot of journalists just filing FOIA requests because a lot of time you need to file things like that because people within politics are obviously covering their ass and aren't just going to tell you.
Yeah.
You have to use that lever of what our democracy affords us. And he ducked a FOIA request for 6 months, just throwing up smoke screens. And when I say duck it, I don't just mean how if you read up on some independent journalists who talk about FOIA requests all the time, what a lot of administrative bodies and executive administrations will do is they'll say like, oh, well, we searched this area of documents for your, what you requested and we couldn't find it. They'll do these little like ticky tack things to sort of stretch and elongate the timeline for when they actually
themselves.
When they actually give you administration. No, Cuomo was directly fighting this in court. This wasn't like let's string you along and give you a little taste.
Well, what was his end game with it though? Like, why did he ever think that it would never come out? That's the crazy thing about it.
Yeah, it really doesn't make a lot of sense. I mean, when you think about it, it's like you should have been. If anything, it made the case. If you watched what Cuomo did across the last, all of 2020, basically with the pandemic, what he did was he consolidated power around himself. Mm-hmm. A lot of the his health officials in New York State had already had infrastructure in place for how to deal with pandemics and things like that, and he completely overrode a ton of it. He put himself in a position where, he's basically like, I'm New York daddy. Everything's gonna go through me, and anyone who pays attention to New York politics knows that that's always the way it's been.
Right.
But this was exceptional where it's like you said, why did you even do this? Because it only would have served your purpose of consolidating power during a pandemic and granting yourself additional powers, which he did several times last year. It would have served you better to have more and be like, wow, look at how, alarming this is. Right. It really doesn't make a lot of sense. The only thing I can think of is the fact that very early on, he had set policies that, disallowed visitation, actually tried to keep a lot of hospice patients and stuff in nursing homes in the building.
Right.
He tried to change a lot. So I get it why he did it from that perspective. Like he was literally trying to quarantine. Mm-hmm. But the issue is it was just like if you remember at the beginning of the pandemic where there were all those cruise ships where people were infected.
Yeah. He
basically did what this in effect, what happened with those cruise ships.
Nursing homes were the cruise ships.
Yeah, you had a bunch of people who were sick on board and no one could leave, so everyone caught it.
Yeah.
That was a big part of, and to be fair to him, he was facing a lot of pushback on the other end where
federal level,
people didn't, well, no, not even on the federal level, but here in New York State where he initially was trying to put in plans where you would be able to send, spread the load of COVID patients throughout hospital systems, and people push back against that, which I was one of those people.
Right, they were shipping people up here to Capital Region.
So
too.
I get it. He was between a rock and a hard place, but at the end of the day, if you lie about numbers and then you literally use your influence and power to obfuscate the truth from reporters,
your legs are cut.
That's it.
Yeah,
you're done.
Yeah, and it's one more instance with Governor Cuomo, that he kind of thought of himself as like a little Teflon Andrew, where, this is just what I'm going to do. And it's crazy to me that he didn't think that this would be, a point where people are going to, attack him on and prosecute him on. Yeah. Potentially.
His own attorney general basically has no choice at this point.
Yeah.
It's just a smoking gun, an absolute smoking gun.
Yeah.
We're talking about thousands of miscounted deaths. I couldn't find a direct number, but I think it's because it hasn't been compiled yet, because a lot of those FOIA requests had just come in over like a week ago. So
was it 14,000 and something that is the current number of deaths in New York nursing homes, which is a tremendous amount of death.
It's incredible.
That's a crazy one, and it's funny because a lot of people at the start of the pandemic were impressed, including myself, with how he got out in front, and during a time when a lot of people knew what was going on, he sat with the state and with the nation to an extent and kind of talked them through what we were going to be doing. What little did we know is that he was, what he was doing, that he was also shirking the responsibility of dealing with the pandemic in nursing homes,
right,
in its entirety.
Well, and I mean, and again, I want to drive this point hard here is this isn't me. I understand fully. I played out all the different chess moves on the chessboard that all these people in executive positions around the country, even Trump, where you were dealt an impossible hand.
Yeah.
There was multiple ways to do things, and every different action on the chessboard had a detrimental effect.
Right.
There was no correct move in and of itself at all times that anyone could have been aware of, because this thing spiraled out of control.
And the guidance changed, a ton in the first few months, right? It's like people were saying, you should be doing this. Oh, actually, it's this. Oh, actually, it's this. Now, on the CDC level, I guess, and on the WHO level, it was fairly consistent most of the time. And when you talk about mitigating risks in the spread of disease and stuff, it's always around quarantining and, the basic things you could do. But yeah, you're right. I mean, when you're looking at it from how you govern and how you lead during something like that, there's tough decisions to be made.
Sure.
But he definitely didn't make all the right decisions, and it's apparent now with this new report that's coming out.
Yeah. So,
shout out Jim Tedesco for getting to the bottom of this.
Yeah, Jim.
Local senator.
Yep. No, he's been pressing him hard. He's been beating him up in the media lately. So we'll see. And just the last point I want to make on this is, it really is just, it's incredible to me the hubris that he had to write that book that he wrote, and knowing full well that he was playing games with numbers the whole time. I mean, that's the most shocking part to me, because it's like, man, like you said, how did you think this wasn't going to come out? And
that's the biggest.
And B, it's just all the rats on the ship are scurrying now. And this is sort of a pattern with Cuomo. Like every 3 or 4 years, there's some scandal or and it's probably actually shorter than that. It's just, it doesn't get hyper focused on.
He had
by
the sexual
media.
Harassment scandal a couple months ago.
IDC Democrats years ago. Yeah, there's been plenty of instances. The Cuomo Bridge, all that, all kind of stuff where there's just this sort of like, it's more than a whiff. Like we get like a strong blast of something that smells and then it just poof disappears.
Yeah.
I don't think this one's going to poof disappear, because as people have mentioned before, like this actually had a lot of function to do with different types of federal funding that came in. You're talking about monetary
per head funding,
misappropriation here too. So, and that, according to his aide, that was what they feared. But again, it's like, then why didn't you just tell the truth? It really doesn't make sense to me. I don't get it.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to hear what their position is on after this and what they say with regards to this report. I haven't seen any official statement.
No, nothing.
Yeah, it's been fairly radio silent with that, which they're normally front and center talking about, Hey, look at this, look at that. He's very quiet about it.
Yeah, we'll have to tune into his Corona fireside chat on Monday and see if he says anything about it.
Yeah, that was a good quick hit, because it's kind of local. Obviously, we're in New York here, if anyone didn't know. And yeah, Jim Tedesco, you're welcome on the podcast to talk about this further. So my first quick hit to keep a coronavirus relevant is Biden announced, and the Biden administration announced, that they now have purchased well over enough vaccines to vaccinate the American public, with the hope of June or July, May or June, to have the entirety of the population vaccinated, with some left over. I think they have 1 billion vaccines, which in an ideal world, what that will mean as America, buys more, as other global leaders, global countries buy more, that it would allow then for that overspill to be given to the less wealthy countries. And, like I said in one of our previous podcasts, hoarding the vaccine when you already have people vaccinated is just going to mean that you're going to prolong the spread of the virus in these countries, and vaccine nationalism is not going to work. And at the end of the day, you're seeing a lot of people now are getting vaccinated, and it's given a ton of relief to these people who are worried. One thing that I'll say on that is, as we find more and more strains, you have the South African strain, I think there's a British strain, there's a weird strain in Brazil. They're showing that the efficacy of these vaccines are not quite the same for these different strains. So, I'm sure right now, while we're talking, there's probably another pharmaceutical company who are developing another vaccine or offshoots of it. But yeah, it's going to be interesting to see kind of how they can roll that out and how quickly they can roll it out. It seems like the vaccine rollout has been going well. Mm-hmm. It's a huge deal to say that they have enough vaccines, because for a long, long time there was kind of this, okay, when are we getting the vaccine? Why didn't we order enough vaccines prior to, all of this? I don't know. It's going to be one of those things now where, like, let's get everyone vaccinated. Let's get them vaccinated quickly. I believe they're opening up Yankee Stadium and a bunch of sports stadiums across the country. I saw an interesting thing actually in Israel, in an ultra-Orthodox neighborhood there was pushback about actually getting vaccinated. I think the amount of people that were vaccinated who could was very, very low. So they ended up throwing a party in order to have people come there and then vaccinate them, which was...
Well, like how?
No, like just having them come there by saying, there's going to be a party, but you're going to get vaccinated at the same time. They all came, and they were able to, like, I think 70% of the people in the area got vaccinated.
That's all it takes is a block party? Cool.
Which Israel, will talk about them later. But they are actually one of the leaders, though, in getting their people vaccinated. They've been, their response to the virus and, getting vaccinations to their people has been very, very good.
Yeah, I mean, for nothing, if not anything else, Israel's hyper competent in...
and funded
national level ventures that they take.
Yeah. And they're keyed into a lot of these issues on a global scale, because they're at the table talking about it and helping shape policy with a lot of these things too. Yeah. That's my first quick hit. It's a big one. Getting those extra vaccine doses could be key to the actual global supply.
Right. And the only thing I want to add to that is I hope that I'm like you said, I'm optimistic. I hope that the Biden administration isn't overpromising here, because as you alluded to earlier, obviously, like, the mRNA vaccines are the ones that are more effective against a lot of these other strains, which from, me reading the breakdown of the science makes a lot of sense, because for example, like the Johnson & Johnson vaccine it's not an mRNA vaccine, which is what it has issue with, like the South African variant. So I'm hoping that I haven't really seen. Have you seen a breakdown of what brand they bought? Is?
Yeah, so Moderna 300,000 doses.
300 million.
300 million doses. Pfizer 300 million.
Okay, so they bought the good one. All right.
AstraZeneca 300 million. Novavax 110 million.
Right.
And Johnson & Johnson 100 million.
Okay. Because I was going to say, we discussed it offline earlier here. Like, for example, South Africa had a giant order of the Johnson & Johnson vaccine, and they shelved it after learning that it was very ineffective against their own variant in country.
Right.
So I'm hoping, that's what I'm saying. I'm hoping that they're not overpromising here, because just this week in the news, you've seen a bunch of stories like, what is it, like Dodger Stadium, where they're in LA doing mass vaccination programs. They had to shut that one down because they ran out. Yeah. So I'm worried that that's a giant undertaking. Yeah. And honestly, if you read the polling on it, the buy-in still is about the same as it was.
Yeah.
I did see they're opening up child trials for vaccinations.
I saw that
this week. So I think that actually might be a huge shift in public opinion where people are on that, because every person I've talked to was like, that has children is like, well, I want to see a trial first, which I think everyone should, Yeah. And you get in these conversations about vaccines with people, and, a little bit of healthy skepticism. There's nothing wrong with that, folks. I mean, especially when you're talking about there not being any trials on children. I think that would be a prudent move for anyone to read that and look into it, just like we have with ourselves. You know what I mean? Yeah. We're all sitting here paying attention to, how well does this one work against this variant? And, what are the percentages? That same scrutiny should be applied to children.
It's a scientific method right there.
Yep. Right? So, like I said, optimistic. Hopefully it can be a big part of us ending this,
Yeah, not just in America, but having contributed to COVAX is the organization that's set up for countries who have overspill vaccines to put into that pile and get the whole world vaccinated. Because ultimately, if coronavirus and this pandemic has showed us nothing, is that borders and jurisdiction does not matter when it comes to spreading this. You know, I mean, obviously closing your borders and all that, will help alleviate it, but if it's not eradicated, you won't be able to open up your borders and your schools and all these different things, because people are traveling. It's a global world we live in.
Yep, definitely. All right, so I'll get into my last quick hit here. This is my gem, my favorite story of the day. All right, so what we got here is Nevada trying to allow the return of company towns in America, and real ones, folks, not like the Facebook campus and in the Bay or anything like that. Like we're talking real company towns. So I got here Nevada's Democrat governor, highlight there, Democrat governor Steve Sisolak is trying to lure high-tech firms into his state with an offer to allow them to effectively form independent governments at the county level, capable of levying taxes and forming courts. Okay, so before we even get into this, has anyone ever seen Robocop? Because it's the only thing that pops in my mind. All I'm thinking here is flying drones with machine guns on them. Like,
yeah,
just insanity. But so let's keep going here. Oh yeah, and by the way, Nevada, that's a Democrat governor, and the state house is also controlled by Democrats. So these are our people, folks. Or well, not everyone listening is a Democrat, but these aren't Republicans trying to do this here. So these so-called tech innovation zones, that's what they're terming them, are being marketed to lure tech companies, perhaps those struggling with high taxes and lockdowns in Silicon Valley, with wide open space and the freedom to do whatever they like on their own land. So essentially what we're talking about here is the Nevada State House is now drafting legislation to allow any corporation that has $250 million in assets and plans to invest at least $1 billion in their new site over the next decade to have basic complete county control and responsibility over the land that they own. Mm-hmm. So we were talking about this a little bit offline. This is arguably to me the most concerning story I've seen, even including anything Trump's done. When people relate, him to fascism and his rabid supporters and threats to the American democracy. This right here, folks, is an actual, like you say, meat and potatoes. This is the building block of what an actual fascist takeover could look like in this country, where you have corporations just literally coming in and saying, I am the state. This is the Nevada essentially allowing, they're delegating the responsibility of governing to a corporation in their state.
Yeah.
So, and obviously America has a rich history of this, right? There used to be mining towns, there used to be railroad towns, all types of things like that. And we have a decent amount of history that shows the insane negative effects that this had on labor rights, and just general rights, social rights. These company towns that used to exist in America, they had this crazy paternalistic type of demeanor where not only was it, you worked for the company, you lived and paid them rent. You didn't even get money a lot of the time. A lot of time you'd be paid in script, which is like monopoly money that the company just gives you and says like, oh yeah, you have these many credits because you worked 70 hours this week.
GE stock.
Yeah, you pay your rent directly to them. You go into the company store, buy, whatever, your groceries and shit like that. And by the way, and the really concerning part about this too is in the legislation, the way that they're crafting it is the company would have to own at least 78 square miles of undeveloped land and uninhabited land. So what that means, folks, is this is going to be in a very remote area. I believe this is in northern Reno where they're talking about. So not only are you saying, okay, we're going to give you complete control. You're going to have your own police force, education. Yeah. You're going to collect taxes. You're going to be remote away from everyone else. So this is
tribal land.
The reason, the reason this pops in my head and reminds me of just just picture it like old West America with tumbleweed rolling down, and it's just like some guy like Boss Tweed just runs everything and is enacting prima nocta on everyone. Like
Demolition Man is kind of like
your wife's
John Spartan. You will find 1 credit for the violation.
Yeah, it's so scary because it's like not these people. It's all going to be so away from the eye, and you're just going to have people there who if you don't have a car or anything, you're there. Where are you going to go? Where are you going to go? Is there going to be a bus coming into Blockchain Town, which by the way, that's the name of the company. We'll get into that in a minute. So I know this is all over the place. This story is just incredible to me.
Now it is hasn't been put through as legislative yet, right? It's not ready for a vote, right?
So this is the timeline of it is interesting, right? So we saw a glimpse. It was spoken about in the State of the State address that the governor gave last year. He talked about it in 2019. There wasn't any movement on it because of pandemic, obviously. That wasn't a legislative priority. I'm sure Nevada had plenty of other things to deal with at the time. So he recently made a statement talking about it a little over a week ago. Now, the interesting thing is there's already a company called Blockchain LLC, which is in Sparks. That's in East Reno. I apologize. I said Northern Reno earlier. They already have all the land and the assets in place for this. So in 2017, they spent $170 million purchasing 67,000 acres of land for the purpose of creating a smart city. A smart city, they're calling a town that has all of its financial transactions performed using blockchain technology. So what they're basically trying to do is supersede banks, which is, that's the main goal of blockchain tech in the first place. I don't hate it. What's that?
I don't hate it.
Yeah, no, I don't hate it either. Yeah. It's a great idea. Don't get me wrong. So the thing is that, think of the timeline here. They purchased this stuff in 2017. So it's like what we talk about all the time, legislation being crafted for the sake of it being a good thing? Or is it, no, these people donated to my campaign and now they're going to get their kickback and get their Robocop land.
Yeah.
That's basically what happened here. There's no way that this company went and made this move and made all these promises to investors and spent, arguably like $500 million probably by now.
Yeah.
And now the legislation needs to get put through. It was something that they were going to bring up in the Nevada legislature last year, but as I said before, it got tabled because not only was the state having their own issues with the pandemic, this company was too. Mm-hmm. They purchased another German blockchain company and had to lay off a ton of workers because of the coronavirus pandemic, so on and so forth. But we got to come back to the real threat at hand here. I mean, in my mind, folks, this is a trial balloon for a return to feudalism. Right. This is our own elected, not mine, but people in Nevada, our own elected officials basically admitting capitalism as it is right now has failed. We cannot govern. We don't have the revenue to govern properly. So what we're going to do is let's try corporate feudalism again. Right. Let's give it another shot.
So has there been a precedent for this in the past? Maybe not as on the nose as this, but Menlo Park, Silicon Valley.
I was going to say, so you have several campuses, tech campuses. Facebook is the first one that came to mind. When you do the research, it's the first thing that'll pop up. People call those corporate towns in some regard, which they are.
They ends up raising taxes, all that.
Right, they do. But here's the difference. They don't have public schools. They don't have their own police force. They can hire private security on their land. Yeah. That's fine. Anyone can do that. That's the right of private property in America.
Yep.
But what we're talking about here is them having sheriffs and people in jails. Mm-hmm. That is not what any other company's doing today in America.
Right.
That doesn't exist. They're talking, again, that legislation, it's critical. It's critical. Let me read the quote. The exercise of any power or duty by the board, that's the board of the company that runs the company town. The exercise of any power or duty by the board supersedes the exercise of that power or duty by the county in which the innovation zone is situated. So what that means, folks, is the people who the government officials who prior had jurisdiction and authority over the county that this company is going to come in and purchase and operate in, they have no authority anymore. Right. The only person who has any overseeing authority here is the state. The state is going to have some supervisors or something that are supposed to be involved. But again, in the legislation, it specifically dictates that they will, at the end of the day, not have any veto power over that. The only way, if something starts going wrong in this place, the only way that anything is going to be able to be done about it is if it literally gets put up for an amendment for a statewide vote. Because there is no county to vote on anything. They don't even mention democracy in this bill. So the people who live in this company town, again, they're going to build homes and apartments. There's going to be people who live here that are going to be paying taxes levied by a corporation. Mm-hmm. There's no mention of any function of elections, how that's going to work.
Yeah.
And at the end of the day, even the governor himself doesn't have veto power over any law that they put in the county.
Right.
So this is just... It's really bad.
I guess the idea of innovation zones where you attract companies to come and want to build companies is not a new thing. What the new part of this and the alarming part of it is the ability to be able to, make your own laws, school districts, tax levies, all of that. One of the interesting things I got from it is as Menlo Park and Silicon Valley becomes less and less attractive, mm-hmm. It's almost like some aspect, it was almost like leaving Earth to go live on Mars.
Right.
You've already squeegeed out all sort of innovation you can get out of that place, raise the taxes, turn that place into an inhabitable place for your regular person because of your taxes and just the cost of living out there. Let's move to a new place now where we can set our own rules and hope to, never have that happen again, or, really just instill what you want from, start to finish there. Yeah, no, it's going to be funny, and it'll be funny to see if there'll be counter legislation around it. Because it looks like there's quite a bit of investment behind it. Was it 250 million with a view to another billion?
Well, yeah, the legislation calls for a commitment for $1 billion investiture over 10 years. So, right. And they've already, just on the land alone, have already put up 170 million. And I love the comparison you just made, because this is that logic. This is the logic of, Earth's fucked, we're going to go to Mars. This is the trajectory we've been on with in peak capitalism, where we are right now, where you've seen it across the last decade or so, where there's been you have Amazon literally just being like, we're gonna open a new warehouse, or a new what was it, a new headquarters. Who wants to give us the best deal on taxes? Who wants to pay for our fucking helicopters?
Who wants to make the cheesiest video to make you guys want to come there?
So what we're doing is, and the important thing is, like, the first evolution of this in the 20th century was sports stadiums. That was the first mechanism, really, where it was like you had these giant sports franchises that wanted to build stadiums in new cities. And what would happen is the local government or the county or the state or whoever, however they want to chop it up, would end up funding some of the building for that in exchange for, you're going to bring revenue to the state. Right. That isn't that bad. People have a lot of issue with it, but if you work those numbers the right way, if you have good owners, like the guy who owns the Atlanta Falcons, where he only uses vendors from Atlanta, and he doesn't like bring in national brands and all this community shit. He tries to keep the money in the community. Yeah. There's ways that you can flex that. With this, this is just, it's like you said, it's now we're to the point where even like for places that don't think that they're going to be an attractive site for like, Amazon or, even Nevada, like they brought Tesla in recently. Yep. That was their latest move a couple years ago.
Gigafactory 1.
Yeah, they're making the electronic, the batteries there, the lithium batteries.
Yeah.
But the thing is, so like this is the next evolution of that. Now that you have this infected concept in politicians' minds where they think, I have to get a big tech company here. I have to get one here. How can I do it? I'm just going to let them build fucking Robocop City.
Well, that was the interesting quote that I got from one of the articles I was reading on this. It's like, while Tesla received $1.3 billion tax break to open its factory in Nevada, Sisolak, who's the governor, appears to be counting on sovereignty as a superior incentive for expanding tech companies.
Yeah.
Which...
That's all that's left.
Yeah.
That's all that's left, is to just let them do whatever they want. Because if you're in an area like, a fucking desert like Nevada is...
Yeah.
What can you really offer them? Yeah. What is there to offer? There's nothing to offer.
Chips for the Bellagio.
These people are going to spend tens of millions of dollars just to bring water there. Yeah. This is going to cost them a ton of money to do it. The only incentive you have in certain areas of the country to bring people in is to just let them be their own government.
Yeah.
This is, anyone who's watched sci-fi, this is literally the end game of any dystopian future movie you've ever seen.
Right.
This is what it is.
Yeah.
And we're putting it on steroid. We're just like, here's the nitrous, boost that car, let's get there even faster.
Right. And, to play devil's advocate in a little bit with this, or I guess to throw another spanner into the works, as automation and the need for actual people to work these factories seems to get less and less.
Right.
What is that town going to turn into? Or what is this area really zone going to turn into then? Right. You've promised all this to the region. Are people going to be really the ones that are going to benefit from this, or are you just giving these techocracies or whatever you want to call them more room to play?
Well, I mean, the concerning thing for me is, again, big picture. You're giving corporations sovereignty in your country.
Yep.
That's what you're doing.
Yep.
You're giving them sovereignty inside your country, which we've already effectively done. As far as in the financial end with Supreme Court, they've declared corporations people in the past. campaign contribution, all these other things.
Yep.
We've been leading the way to this. And this was honestly, like we said, like I was talking to you offline about, this was the only end game. This is the only thing there is left to offer once you have this system rife with income inequality where all the wealth just keeps getting sucked to the top. This was always going to be the final level that we reached. I just didn't think it was going to be this fast.
Right.
Also, I didn't think it was going to be Democrats doing it.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the most shocking thing to me, is that this has been something that's kind of obviously been cooking underneath the surface that a ton of national Democrats must have known about.
Right.
No one's coming out against this. I haven't seen Bernie say anything. I mean, it's probably on his radar. Like you said, there's a ton of important shit going on.
Yep.
But this is something that now, like, this baby needs to be aborted now.
Yep.
Right now, while it's a zygote. You can't let the heartbeat begin on this shit, because the problem is we have this, we're a republic. If you don't apply pressure now and Nevada makes this a law, what are you going to do? You can't stop it.
You set the precedent then, and
you set the precedent. And once you give a corporation those types of rights to have all these functions the same as a county, how the fuck do you take them away? Yeah. How do you how does that work? Because the real thing is here, it probably will be a profitable venture. Right. It probably will. This is
so. The last question I have on it is how will that work into modern American politics then? You know what I mean? Like in terms of federal funding and all that, is that designed by the state to a certain point? How is that funneled into that? There's so many questions I have on it. I don't know how it would play out, and I don't know why Nevada would back itself into a corner like this. I mean, I do know it's money.
I mean, I'm sure they have constitutional scholars and stuff looking over all this stuff, but it does raise a very good question, like you said. Like, okay, so if you have a school system in your company town, how does that work with like federal funding and stuff? How does that work? And the only thing I can see from everything I've read is they're giving them county status. Mm-hmm. So I would assume it would just all work the same. Right. I don't know.
So this is a new county.
Yeah.
Welcome to Facebookville.
Yeah. I don't know. Wildly concerning. But all right, we spent a ton of time on this. Why don't we move into what do you want to do? Foreign or domestic?
Let's end with the impeachment. How about?
Okay.
Because I feel like everyone is probably impeachment out. So we can kind of just wrap on what the meaning behind the impeachment is and kind of what it means when it's all said and done. Okay. So we'll you want to take a 2-minute break and we'll go right into the Israel ICC thing?
That sounds good to me.
All right. All right, so the first of our main topics is the recent ruling by the ICC, which is the International Criminal Court, to clear the way for a potential war crimes investigation of Israel. This is big, because first of all, Israel are not part of the ICC, neither is the US, funnily enough. But they established jurisdiction because Palestine is. So they're able to, much like any sovereign nation where, if there's a crime committed, you can try those people or have them, what's the word I'm looking for? You can have them extradited. So you can charge them in this criminal court, the ICC. It's big because for a long, long time, Israel kind of had carte blanche to fight and oppress people over there. And I'm not saying Palestine is a completely innocent player in this, at least the Palestinian regime. But it's the people that have really suffered through this. Now, I don't know how quickly this will move. I know the main prosecutor on this with the ICC, I believe her tenure is up in June or July. So things could move quickly because it's a big step for, when you're looking at human rights and just the UN in general and the ICC's function, they only ever really go after major war crimes. As messed up as it sounds, there's rules of war that are kind of, toe the line, so to speak. Some of them gets murky, but some of the people that have been prosecuted through the ICC in the past, they've gone down, and some of the more high profile ones, Slobodan Milosevic, you have some recent ones, African dictators and stuff, but
the Russians with Ukraine and Georgia,
and those all will come up again and kind of further in those cases. But I think it's good to look back at kind of how we got here with this. There's definitely been some enablement with Israel. America, number one, being one of the biggest funders of the Israeli regime, if you want to call it that, in terms of military, without really cracking down on their advancement of settlements in the West Bank. It's also good to look at why they aren't involved in the ICC. The main reasons is that they didn't want them taking a deeper look at what was going on. They didn't want to be held accountable. Another thing is, like, if you look back, I think I have some dates here, and so the 3rd of January 2015, and this kind of just shows you the mentality that Bibi and the Israeli government have had for a long, long time. They freezed Palestine's tax funds over their bid with the ICC. So that's vindictive right there.
Yep.
In 2019, the ICC opened up the war crimes investigation about what was going on in the West Bank and in Gaza. Then in 2021, I think it was the 5th of February is when the actual ruling that the ICC were going to go after him.
Yeah.
And since then, the American State Department have said they don't agree with it. Now, I don't know why. Well, I do know why they wouldn't agree with it, is because, Israel and the US have been, simpatico for a long, long time. Under the Trump administration, I believe Pompeo put sanctions on the ICC. We talk about sanctions.
On members, yeah.
On members. And it's just a whole mess. I mean, the ICC are also going after Hamas. We talked about that a little bit. So it's not just, they're going after, and I think Netanyahu came out this week saying it was anti-Semitic to even go after, which is ridiculous. And it really, we should all be anti-Zionist, right? I think they've been a power in the region for a long, long time. You go back to 1967 when that war happened, where East Jerusalem, the West Bank, Gaza Strip was fought over. And since then it's been just a whole mess. The advancements of the settlements, which, again, that's a war crime right there. You're causing more trouble in that region by overstepping your boundaries, literally, and minimizing a people in that region. And for a long, long time, they haven't been heard. They've been heard by the international community without any actual action against Israel. You want to talk about sanctions? Who was the last person to sanction Israel?
Well, who even has any motivation to? You know what I mean? Considering that they are one of our top allies. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, though, why are they? The good thing to ask is, why are they such a strong ally? A lot of it is tied to the evangelical community here.
Oh, yeah, we'll get into that.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of it is tied to that.
Well, and also they're viewed as a bulwark against the Middle East, the Middle East at large.
Yeah.
Same way that Egypt was for a long time, being an American ally.
Yeah, so I'm hoping that, both Israel and Hamas are properly looked at for these war crimes. And when I say properly looked at, like, let's have a deep dive into what actually went on there. I know there's internal mechanisms at play that both countries, I don't trust Hamas to, pick themselves accountable for a lot of the things that they did, like, having their own people as human shields and whatnot. Those are some of the allegations against them. But, I think it was in 2019 or 2020 are some of the specifics that the ICC are coming after Israel for what they did in some of those protests that were right at the Gaza Strip.
Yeah, those were probably the most egregious thing that had that not, some of those events not happen, because the 2014 Gaza war is probably something that the ICC and the international community at large can look at and see significant blows dealt on both sides.
Yep.
Obviously, disproportionate response from Israel because their military capability.
This is power.
But those protests, what happened at the Gaza border in 2018, there were stories leaking out from a ton of independent media, because that's one thing. Israel's very good at quashing negative media from in country. There were literal snipers shooting people in the head at those protests in 2018. I remember reading about those. Something that they tried to push back on, saying that it was like false flag stuff done by Hamas. And also, I feel like we should give some context to that. Hamas isn't even an exclusively Palestinian group. It's funded by Iran. Right. First of all, it's basically a break off of Hezbollah, which is one of their paramilitary arms. So that's also a huge thing at play here too, which is when you consider, obviously, America also not being an ICC member is going to stiffen at any of its allies that also are not members from being investigated by them. But also America has its own, had its own history with the ICC. The ICC wanted to come after America for war crimes committed in Afghanistan.
Yep.
If you saw recently, on Trump's way out, he pardoned a bunch of the BlackRock folks. That's
the helicopter.
Yeah, that's exactly what the ICC want. A large part of their investigation. If you remember part of that story, that was there was a Navy SEAL that stabbed a detained Afghanistani child. Basically, he was a teenager and killed him. And that it's just, that's a whole nother mess. But keeping the focus here on it is, it's actually really interesting to see it play out, because a bunch of other European countries also denounced this that are ICC members. So there's obviously a ton of, international politics at play here as well, where people are, like we said before with China and the, them in the UN and people posturing, things like that.
Yeah. Well, there was a specific dissent, I believe, from the court. There was one dissenting member. Who, for whatever reasons, which may be valid. I'm just looking at it from a strictly, why not investigate him?
Right. Well, I think most of the, for example, Germany was one country that also denounced it, who is an ICC member. Right. And like you said, the one member of the court of the deliberating body to decide whether it was going to grant jurisdiction to the ICC to prosecute these war crimes in the first place. The big fight over it was basically a procedural one that everyone was arguing about initially. Bibi, Netanyahu, he came right out and he basically tried to cite the ICC's own statutes, which said this isn't even a sovereign nation. But actually, Palestine, years ago, I believe it was, what was it? Back in 2009, Palestine issued a declaration covering to the ICC, trying to cover the atrocities on Palestine in Palestinian territories dating all the way back to 2002. And the ICC's own statutes actually state that states can accept ICC jurisdiction via two methods. You can either join the court's founding treaty, the Rome Statute, which means
1998, I believe.
Which would mean you technically, that's what Bibi's referring to, you'd have to be a sovereign nation to join the court's founding treaty in the first place. Or you can accept the ICC jurisdiction over specific crimes through a declaration. And that's what Palestine had done going all the way back to 2009. They've repeated this process several times. They did it once again in 2015. And that's what this investigation is sort of launching off of, the one from 2015, that declaration they made.
Right. And, outside of what the ICC are looking to investigate here around war crimes, we've seen instances of Israel just being really heavy-handed on a people that are so persecuted. I mean, they turned off water to the Gaza Strip. They really just, during these different instances where, Hamas are, inadvertently shooting rockets into Israel. We know that.
Yep.
That's not, I don't think, in contention here.
Sure, no one disputes that.
But at the same time, there's aggressions from Israel who, have so much to power and ability to be able to, in a flip of a switch, really cut off everything that are the lifeblood to these poor people in these areas. And, you know, there's a famous Irish song. It's like, and you dare to call me a terrorist as you look down your gun.
Right.
You know what I mean? If I'm in the Gaza Strip and I'm seeing my people oppressed every day, I want to talk about having nothing and the things that they're able to do as they get minimized and minimized and minimized, while, you know, America is backing, you know, a lot of what Israel is doing.
Funding it,
you know, appeasing them all the time. You know, as someone who's living through that, you know, what are your options in that moment? You know, you're going to grow angrier and angrier and angrier.
And especially considering there's a lot of young men there, and I believe unemployment is over 50%. So you know, that's
a breeding ground for militant terrorism.
It's like what we talked about, you know, way prior to forming this podcast, talking about all the civil unrest in America last year after the George Floyd stuff and all that. You know, that some of that was at play there. There was a ton of unemployment. That's a perfect storm. Doesn't matter what country you're in. If you have a certain number of unemployed young men, there's going to be some problems. And it doesn't even, you know, regardless of the politics.
Right.
You know, and that's just a fact of all through human history.
Right. And, you know,
idle hands.
And what's crazy about all of this is, like, you know, a lot of people see, you know, they look to the, you know, the two parties, 2 state, 1 state, you know, there's always that discussion going on. And, you know, you have Jared Kushner over there as the special peacekeeper or whatever his title was, trying to figure that out. Meanwhile, they're moving embassies and just creating more of a shitstorm.
And at the base of it all is, like what we said, like those socioeconomic issues in Gaza, and it's you know, it's important to remember here, people, that that's what Israel's inflicting on them. It's not like it's just, oh, these people are, I think, what did Ben Shapiro, like, he had his one famous quote that got him in a bunch of trouble where he said, you know,
called them basically third class
citizens. Yeah, he said Palestinians love to live in
shit and squalor.
Yeah. You know, and it's like, it's just so disingenuous, because it's like, no, this is what you guys are cutting them off from the world in so many different regards. And what the most important part of all this is, folks, is the ICC and all this stuff we're talking about now that it's like at a higher level and being looked at from a worldview, is people talking about 2 state, 1 state solutions, and Bibi just basically, him and his, you know, his, which they are, you know, they're right wing ultra nationalist, his party, absolutely. And they have a not nowhere near as firm a grip as, like, you know, say a Modi does in India. You know, Bibi's certainly faced some. Well, I think quite a bit of opposition in his own country at various points.
Well, isn't there contention over the election? Haven't they gone to multiple runoffs?
Yeah, there's been all kinds of, and the thing is, there's been plenty of claims of, you know, election interference and things like that. I don't think I've seen any, like, literal election fraud coming out of it, but there's been interesting stuff. But the point I was trying to make earlier is, like, we're talking about an apartheid state. So whenever you're talking about, you know, people getting these discussions about, oh, Israel, Palestine, whatever, and, oh, they should just do this. It's just like what we talk about here in America, where, you know, the police brutality issue and things like that. It's like, how can you expect you're going to sit here and act like you want to measure the Palestinian people, and I say that people, let's keep that in mind, because Hamas and a lot of these terrorist organizations doing the rocket launching and stuff, those aren't all the people. Like, that's just, there are people just living there trying to survive, trying to live in their homeland.
Right.
If you're telling these people that you're subhuman and you're creating an apartheid state, that's not a playing field that negotiation can happen on in the first place. And as long as other countries in the West, especially America, continue to not apply any political pressure on Israel, it's not going to stop.
Yeah.
Because at the end of the day, even if the ICC does come down with any ruling, just like other bodies have against other American war crimes, for example, we have some of the most powerful militaries in the world. Like the UN or like NATO, or like, no one's going to come invade us or do anything if we don't respond to these things.
Yeah.
And at any moment so basically what would happen is you prosecute someone through the ICC. Oh, you're a war criminal now. If your home country where you live and you're that person says that's not happening,
they can just,
if you don't travel, nothing will ever happen.
Right.
If you go to another country that does respect the ICC and arrests you, America can, that country isn't going to hold on to you just because that ICC ruling, because someone like Trump or Biden can just be like, I'll sanction the fuck out of you if you don't let him go right now. And they will, because it's not worth it to them.
Yeah.
that's part of the weakness with some of these, like some of these, multilateral cooperation agreements that countries enter into, is that a lot of them don't have any actual enforcement mechanism.
They carry water,
other than small sanctions. And I believe it's the interesting thing too is that you have some of these countries in the EU siding with Israel on this. And I'd like to see, like, if there's going to be any more statements from them. Like I said, I think it was Germany, and I can't remember who else. I was going to ask you, is it to join the EU or to be in it? Do you have to be in the ICC?
No.
You don't, right?
No,
okay.
No. Yeah.
So that's really interesting to me, because I saw that, in the research for this, that, for example, Ukraine and Georgia had actually gone through similar issues that the Palestinians did, trying to make claims against the Russians.
Right.
Because there were areas like, for example, Crimea, which Russia annexed.
Yeah.
They were attempting to use this same mechanism where they're saying, oh, well, we're making a declaration. And nothing really happened of it. And I feel like that's kind of what's probably going to happen here, because even if you get some of these prosecutions, say Bibi gets his way, where he effectively, runs a decent campaign on it enough where the U.S. backs him and some of these other member countries. And the ICC would have no issue coming down on Hamas, because there is no country to defend them. Iran's not going to make any statement. Iran's whole game is Hezbollah.
Not to seem like they're not.
And Hamas. Nah, chill. That's just, those are just people over there. That's not the state.
That's not us.
And there's some truth to that in some regard. Like, what's his name? The general that Trump drone strike.
Oh, yeah.
I'm blanking on his name right now. Wow. But
Soleimani?
Yeah, Soleimani.
Yeah.
He did run Hezbollah, like, separate from the Iranian government. Like, he was the guy.
Yeah.
So it's just going to be interesting to see how it shakes out. I don't know how much is going to come from it, but at least I think it's good that you have this multilateral body at least trying to say things on the world stage that no other major country is really willing to say.
Right. And there has been a growing condemnation as we see the struggles of the Palestinian people, during these different, wars, because it's literally an ongoing, every few years, there'll be another upkeep of, just more drone strikes, whatever it is. I mean, Israel has that shield. What's it called? The
Iron Dome.
Iron Dome.
Yeah, to protect from rocket strikes.
Right, which is crazy in itself that they have that. It's just a hotbed of just an absolute shit show. And I don't mean that to diminish what the actual struggles of both people are, both Israelis and Palestinians there. Mm-hmm. But I think as a growing condemnation around this happens, like you said, a unilateral with countries who are, saying, hey, that's not right. Hey, this is not right. We're only talking about a few instances that they're actually being prosecuted on or tried to be prosecuted on. But there's probably a laundry list from Israel where they've really overstepped the mark. I talked about cutting off water. Mm-hmm. I didn't even talk about some of the other things that, you could potentially say that's fucked up. But I think the ICC don't want to overreach a little bit too much with this.
Right.
What I hope from this is when it's all said and done, whatever the outcome is that it doesn't flare up more tensions between the two of them.
Right.
And I mean, that's just a tinderbox always, especially if Israel continued to expand the settlements in East Jerusalem.
Right. And it's like it has to keep coming back to this word, apartheid, because like we were just talking about, all the coronavirus vaccine stuff. Like that's another method of how Israel has enforced this apartheid state. They're refusing to give any vaccinations to Palestinians.
Right.
So, because there are some areas where there's overlap, right? Where you have like Palestinians living amongst Jews and things like that. And they're being, non-citizen. They're being treated as how we treat, undocumented immigrants in this country with, like, say, all of our stimulus stuff. Anything coming out of like coronavirus help, immigrants have been, harshly treated, and the same thing's happening here. But the difference is, at the same time that they're saying, no, we're not affording you any help in this regard, they're also blocking any country the same way with embargoes, like you were mentioning Cuba and stuff earlier. You can't how that in and of itself is a war crime.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like there's a ton of issues here at play. And at the end of the day, like I have sympathy for, civilians on both sides. Like obviously that's horrifying. You have, your government, because that's the thing. There's plenty of people amongst the Israelis who do not like Bibi Netanyahu, who understand that his constant aggressive stance is what's elongating all of this tension and conflict. They understand, like, you know, and there's clear historical evidence for what you do in this type of situation, right? Where if you have a terroristic element like Hamas or Hezbollah or whoever living amongst the population, guerrilla warfaring you, what you do is you try to get the population on your side. You help them. He can't do that because he has an apartheid stance.
Yeah.
So there won't be an end to any of this until someone bigger than Israel steps in, like maybe an ICC, if they have, if they can maybe, throw some folks in prison or whatever. I don't know. Or America would be the ideal scenario because we fund them so much. A lot of, different ways that we could lean on them in the international community and such. But until that happens, this isn't going to stop because there's too much to be gained by Israel in continuing what Bibi's stance has been on this.
And as well as that is, if you're looking at it from an extremist standpoint, the Israel and Palestine conflict is always one of the bullet points that extremism, Islamic extremism looks at. So as long as this is a breeding ground for extremism, if there's no actual give or take by Israel, because ultimately there has to be some give and take. The fact that they're inflaming tensions by continuing to increase the settlements in the West Bank, that's a posture that is going to just madden people. You've already, minimized these people to so little of land while you cut them off and embargo those people. Like, what do you expect these people are going to want to do with
no other choice,
with 50% unemployment? The young men there in Palestine have no choice. That's a breeding ground for extremism.
Yeah, because what you're talking about here, basically, guys, is it's like people joining a gang in low socioeconomic areas in America. Yeah, it's like if there's no work, you have to feed your family.
Yeah.
People are sick and destitute.
Right.
What are you going to do? What are your options? Because you can't travel. A lot of these people, it's an open air prison. A lot of them where they are. If you ever get caught up, say, for example, there's been plenty of cases of this where you live in a certain area where rocket attacks happened or you're connected, your face is on a corkboard somewhere that, Israel has you. You can't leave.
Right.
You can't go anywhere.
You talk about stop and frisk.
Yeah, you're talking about being
the oppression that happens there around that with the soldiers on the streets.
Right.
And not to cut you off, but I mean that, like I said, there was a lot of parody in what happened when the UK army were on the streets of Northern Ireland. It was the same type of thing. They were positioning themselves in a place where a lot of people did not want them to be there. There was a partition within our island. And that's why you'll always see there's a lot of sympathy between the Irish plight against the Northern Ireland, which, I believe is part of Ireland, the island. And now what you're seeing happening and has been happening in Israel and Palestine for the last 60 plus years.
And then on the other end of that spectrum is like I mentioned earlier, you have like Germany, for example, supporting Israel in the ICC in this case. It's sort of the opposite of what you were just the dynamic you're talking about. Like Israel was a state formed after World War II. Germany is a very openly sympathetic country to the role they played in World War II. They've written a ton of law around it. They've reformulated their entire education system around it to, basically pay penance on the world stage for what their country did. And it's crazy because if you mix that with like what we mentioned earlier, we can get into a little bit, like the real just dark, seditious reason why a lot of American politicians in power actually do support Israel as fervently as they do. A lot of it has to do with these evangelical end times beliefs.
Yeah.
It actually has very little to do with geopolitics. I mean, some of it, of course, always does. But there's like, what is the prophecy? They basically think like
that they needed.
The Jews need to be annihilated by the Muslims to bring around like the cataclysm,
the end of days.
Yeah, I mean, and that's and folks, this isn't me. Like, we're not conspiracizing. Like these national prayer breakfasts and stuff.
Yeah,
that a lot of these Christian politicians go to, which, you know, I'm not a religious person myself. Everybody can do them, but once we start bleeding into politics with it, you know, it's fair game.
Right.
Same thing with, you know, Bibi trying to shield himself with claiming anti-Semitism and all these things. It's like, you're a president, dude.
Right.
Stop. Please stop.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
And the evangelicals have a ton of money.
Right.
And, you know, that's the catalyst to why, a big portion of the catalyst to why America is so involved in the Israeli plight, if you want to call it that.
Yeah, I mean, it's some real old school evangelicism right here. Very fundamentalist. You know, Mike Pence has commented on this many times. It's out in the open, folks. Just go Google it.
Yeah.
These people like legitimately believe in this prophecy. They think that as long as they keep allowing Israel to be, you know, a big dick player in the Middle East and agitate, the Muslims will unite.
It's so messed up.
And try to. I mean, it really is. Like, that's what they think. So
that's what's dictating some foreign policy, by the way.
Yeah.
Nuts.
Cool. Awesome.
Yeah, so, you know, last thing we'll say, it'll be interesting to see, you know, how far the ICC can take it, you know, how quickly they'll move on this, what will the implications be for Israel, how the US will, you know, how Biden will talk about it, how that administration will talk about it. I think for the most part, the Biden administration sees a kind of dead end in Israel and Palestine, so they don't see it as a priority within their administration, from what I've been reading.
Yeah, he saw Obama fail in that regard.
Right.
You know? And that's, you know, you only have so much political capital on the world stage to expend on things like this.
Yeah.
You know, so
4 years goes by quick.
Yeah, I mean, I understand his position on it because, and honestly, like, so say, for example, even if Biden, you know, was a progressive hero here and sided with the ICC, like, at the end of the day, it still boils down to what we were talking about. You know, there really isn't, they're not going to actually imprison anyone, probably. Yeah. It's not going to happen.
Right.
And again, it's, we're so simpatico with Israel in that regard because, you know, for example, like, a quote from Bibi right here. Like, he argues that this ruling from the ICC rewards Palestinian terrorism, right? So right there, keyword terrorism. America does this same thing when for example, like the Trump administration, Pompeo, you know, you'll probably see it from Blinken and Biden too, talking about like Iran, for example. They'll say Iranian terrorism. Whenever some of these other weaker states have factions within them, whether it's government sanctioned or not, do things on the world stage that, you know, people would consider terrorism. That's what they call it out in the media. You know, the West gets to label it that way. But for example, when America's in Afghanistan and executing prisoners of war and torturing people and putting people in Guantanamo Bay, that's not terrorism. How isn't it? You know what I mean? We're literally talking about the same things. That's part of what some of these charges that the ICC wants to bring against some Palestinians is, you know, for torture and things like that. You know, America did a ton of that across the last 2 decades. And it's really just a matter of who has the ability to have the megaphone. You know what I mean?
It's exceptionalism. It's American exceptionalism and it's Israeli exceptionalism. They feel like they can do these things without getting reprimanded.
Right. And you know, in the same regard, like we were saying before, how like Hezbollah and Hamas are removed from Iranian government in some regard. That is also true for our CIA. And, you know, there's a ton of shit they do that presidents just don't know about.
Black ops.
That's absolutely true. You know, go look into Nixon's history. There's a ton of, you know, interesting stuff around Watergate in that regard, you know, with George H.W. There's some really shady stuff that, you know, some of these clandestine organizations totally do stuff off book that
by design.
Politicians don't know, but they do that on purpose. It's called plausible deniability.
Yep.
But at the end of the day, when we're talking about press hits and people calling people terrorists, things committed by nation states or not, you know, you just got to keep an objective eye in it and just, you know, look into each situation of what happened, who knew about it, whether it was sanctioned or not.
Yep. You know, and one, I guess, committee or super PAC or lobby group to look at is AIPAC, AIPAC, which is the American Israeli Public Affairs Committee. And just look at the amount of clout that they have. Again, a ton of evangelicals on there, and they help shape policy that America around this movement. So
there are literal states, I believe it was in Texas, there are states that have taken lobbyist money from AIPAC, this organization, where they put it into their state charter where if you get involved in what's called boycott, divestment, and sanctions, the BDS movement, which seeks to put pressure on Israel with economic boycotts, that if you partake in those, you can't work for the state. Yeah. So all these people who cry about like, oh, freedom of speech, blah, 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 like,
they don't give a shit about that.
That arguably is the most anti-freedom of speech enshrined thing in government in America today. But right-wingers love it and don't ever say anything about it. But they want to complain about Facebook and Twitter all day, every day, even though it's a private company.
I'm being muzzled as I'm on Fox for the 5th time in a week.
Yeah. So,
All right. So, that's what's going on there. I ask anyone who's interested in it to look up, some of the points that we brought across. I think we're being impartial enough to say that, there's obviously atrocities that happen on, I hate even using this word anymore, both sides.
Yeah, I hate it so much.
There is, but you look at the weight that each of those countries have and who's backing them, and there has to be some give and take there.
I think we should say reciprocated violence or something, something fancy. Because the both sides thing, that's
been hijacked.
It tastes like ashes in my mouth.
Right. Yeah. All right. So that's that. First main topic done. Second topic. We have the TV on here next to us. It's on mute. The House impeachment managers deliver closing arguments. So let me start off this one because, as January 6th was going down, first of all, before January 6th ever happened, all the way back to pre-election, even pre-election season, I didn't see ever a peaceful transfer of power. I didn't foresee that happening where there was an insurrection on the Capitol, but I just never saw Trump saying, "Oh, I lost. Let me hand the keys of the White House over to you, Joe Biden." I never saw that happening, and there was overtures months prior. There was overtures on the night of, and a lot of the reporting around that it was a tactical. It was a tactical ploy by Trump.
He was saying the election was rigged weeks before voting even started.
Yeah, and he even cut off his nose to spite his face with a lot of it because it's like, oh, vote in person, even though you would have got far more voters. It would have been a closer election,
definitely,
if he encouraged, because a lot of the people were literally boycotting the election.
Yeah, there was a lot of weird. He might have. That's it's an argument you could make.
Yeah, it would have been closer for sure. But just around this impeachment, and I've listened to way too much of it.
Yeah.
I don't know how anybody can look at Trump's defense team, which I believe is their D team, because he had people drop out.
There's no one left. That's why.
He has a personal injury attorney. He has a personal injury attorney defending him right now. And regardless of what you think about the Democrats or even the Republicans, if you're looking at it as an impartial juror, you're looking at what was said leading up to it, what was said the day of. A lot of people like to make, well, if you say fire in a theater and there's no fire and you cause a stampede, then you're on the hook for that. Mm-hmm. This goes beyond that. And I heard the analogy of Trump was like the fire chief saying there was a fire.
And then didn't send
the trucks.
Yeah.
And it's infuriating and hilarious at the same time just to watch Republicans tie themselves in knots trying to prove that it wasn't incitement. And Trump incriminated himself with his tweets. I was talking to you earlier about how the timeline of everything. And some of the video was jarring in that it really connected the dots on how close this insurrectionist mob who were, literally chanting "Hang Mike Pence," how close they came to getting to Mike Pence. I'm almost certain that if they got to people like Nancy Pelosi, Chuck Schumer, or something like that, they would have been beaten down.
Well, I mean, they were beating police with weapons. What police who
with
had
Trump
weapons?
flags.
Well, I'm saying they beat armed police. So would anyone conceive they would stop if they got to Congress people?
Yeah.
Like, no, of course not. No, they wouldn't. That was their objective. That's why they went there.
Yeah, and let's just look at the constitutionality of actually impeaching him,
Right.
which I guess was the first hurdle that the House managers had to overcome. There was some support, obviously, on the Republican side for, saying it was constitutional, which, if you look at the Constitution and the president before that, there has been, and I think it's apparent that, Mitch McConnell kind of slowed it down, and he was one of the people then said, oh, you can't impeach him. He's out of office. Well, you're the one who wouldn't put the articles through when they wanted to do it.
Right.
And a lot of it comes down to accountability. There has to be some sort of repercussions for what he did and what he incited. And above inciting it, I think a more telling feature of what Donald Trump did that day was his tweets while the insurrection was going on, basically coming at Mike Pence as he was fleeing with his family for his life. Mm-hmm. It took him so long to actually get on camera and then eventually just say, we love you, go home, you're special people.
Yeah.
At that point, I think a cop was already dead.
Yeah, I think so, yeah.
They were still in the grounds, running rampant around the Capitol. And, and then he didn't call Mike Pence, I think, for 10 days after it, or 5 days.
Yeah, I read his staff was pissed.
Yeah, but then also, you hear, oh, Trump didn't know the severity of it. You're the president of the United States. You probably have at your fingertips the availability of more information than anybody in the world. You could probably go a live view on the cameras in the fucking Capitol building.
I mean, he absolutely...
And you're going to play dumb?
The video that the House impeachment managers showed, that 15-minute video, the stunning one they revealed on the first day, which I'm glad they did that because it gave enough time for it to circulate through the media and everybody to really consume it. When he was about halfway through that speech, after earlier in the speech, he'd said, oh, we're going to march to the Capitol right now and encourage, the Republicans, remind them who the patriots are.
Yeah.
They were already fighting police while he was midway through that speech.
Right.
So, and if you look at the diagrams of how far away it was, there was no way that, first off, you could hear it.
Yeah.
Because there were reporters on the ground right there, and a lot of them left the actual rally to go follow because they heard the commotion. They saw that what was happening. And probably one of the most shocking things for me was, and it still isn't really an answered question, we obviously all know that, Capitol Police, didn't get the reinforcements that they felt they needed. There was someone was going up the works administratively. Still haven't found any answers on that.
Yeah.
But the amazing part to me is so you have a melee on the lawn, on the steps to the building that goes on for, 10 minutes, 15 minutes before people really get to the doors to even start to try to breach them. And you see them cutting back and forth in live time in the video of them just everybody in the chamber just chilling.
Yeah.
How was there no communication from the guys outside getting beat on to the guys who were inside already in that chamber?
Right.
How did it not get shut down immediately?
Right. And
they'd be all right, you all got to leave. Just from the possibility of anything that could happen, whether they were fully aware of how riled up the crowd was, how many there were, how armed they were, any of that. How do you even let it go that far? And that's what you mentioned earlier. It was just amazing because these people were less than a minute away from reaching Mike Pence, Mitt Romney, Democrats, all these people. So in my mind, there isn't really this fake defense that, his lawyers put forward. And that's another really telling part is what you were saying before, he had a personal injury lawyer handling arguably one of the highest levels of law in our country, constitutional law. He's a fucking personal injury lawyer. That right there should prove, we're going to get into the politics of all this afterwards, aside from the procedure. But that shows you the Republican establishment, they have the Federalist Society. They have all these pipelines that they feed lawyers and judges through. All these
constitutionalists to the death.
All these little training grounds, and that's all Trump has available to him. That showed none of these people are going to stick their neck out for him. The only reason any of these Republican politicians are even making noises conciliatory or defensive of Donald Trump at this point is purely political. They don't actually believe this shit. The proof is in who actually shows up You got Nikki Haley the other night coming out, who's been one of his staunchest allies.
That was a hell of a interview with Politico.
Yeah, and you know, obviously she's trying to cover her own ass because she's going to run for president. You know, like Lindsey Graham probably will. Yeah. A bunch of these other people who you see her waffling in and out of, you know, making statements initially. Oh, this was horrifying, to now defending Trump. But you know, the politics at play here. It's just like with the first impeachment. The posturing, how people see themselves coming out of this on the Republican side, and even the Democrat side to some regard, you know, that's the real thing at play here. Because, you know, like we're gonna get in, like, I mean, we can get into it now. You know, they would need 67 votes to convict Donald Trump.
17 Republicans.
They're
not going to get that.
They're not going to get that. So, again, it's largely just like the last one. You know, it's all, let's get it on the record. You know, make sure it's in the history books. Blah blah blah. Right before we got on, they were going to let witnesses testify, but they amended that to just putting them on the record, depositions instead of having them live. So,
and I'd hazard a guess that it was because the defense team was probably just going to steep this whole thing in some sort of diversionary witness calling, where they're going to call random people, and
they're going to call the QAnon shaman.
Yeah,
have him pulled out of prison to testify.
Yeah, but just even talking about that, like, you have accounts from insurrectionists talking about, like, Trump said he was going to actually march with us to the Capitol.
Right.
You can't have that many people that are riled up about stop the steal. You're talking about, oh, you have to be strong, you have to be this. You have fucking Giuliani talking about, you know, fire and brimstone or whatever he was talking about, like, you'd have to take it with strength, and, you know, just using like language that when you're talking to an angry group of people who think that the literal government and democracy is at risk, you're going to light that tinderbox, send them up towards the Capitol building, and think they're not going to do anything when, you know who they are. You're after gathering militiamen.
Right.
All different types of far-right militiamen. Like, there's no way in hell that you don't... The intel is out there. The FBI gave the intel out there that white supremacist militias and groups are the most dangerous
they are.
threat
they are.
to America. You know, these people... You know, a lot of people... You know, I've been vocal on it, and how, you know, the Black Lives Matter movement and the protests that we saw in the summer, for the size of them, those were the biggest protests this country has ever seen. Not only was it in this country, it was globally. Mm-hmm. Now, whatever you think about Black Lives Matter, for the amount of people that actually protested, you know, independent numbers coming out, I think 90% of them was peaceful. Which I think, all in all, if you want to be generous, I think there was 21 people that died over the course of those months-long protests.
Which is incredible.
It's incredible.
Considering how many, like, buildings were burned and literal police stations attacked. Yeah.
Yeah. And, you know, the conversation that a lot of people try to say, well, Antifa were raging war in the summers. And, like, you're talking about a small portion of the size of people that demonstrated. Mm-hmm. And that actually plays to my point as well, is like, when you have that many agitated people thinking that they're being marginalized and you know, not treated correctly, or if there's some sort of nefarious stuff going on around what they're trying to achieve, there's obviously going to be instances of, you know, shit that happens and stuff that happens. That's just protest.
And face to face with the actual police who've been inflicting the damage on the community. Like, you know, that's why it's incredible that it was only, you know, however many deaths there were or injuries or whatever, not, you know, not to excuse any of it, but that's the difference at play here. Is anyone who tries to make, like, compare, like, oh, the protests this summer, you didn't say anything, like, oh, talking about, you know, all these politicians that are, you know, on the Democrat side that are, you know, coming at Trump for what he said. And then Republicans trying to compare, like, oh, where were you last summer? First off, again, those weren't directed. Those were all Wildcat. Like, there was no, you know, now it's been coming out more and more across the last few weeks that a lot of this was staged. There were, you know, Charlie Kirk, for example, bust a bunch of people out. Turning Point USA, which we already know is a wildly astroturfed organization.
Yes.
Rich billionaire donors pumping money into all these wildly unpopular right-wing figureheads. But yeah, we're seeing that. all the stuff that happened this summer, I was involved. We Impact Us. I was involved in some of it. You came out to some of them.
Yeah.
Like that was just us in our city. We sat down. We made a plan.
Yeah.
We kept it peaceful.
Yeah.
Obviously in some of these larger cities where you have more people, that's not going to happen because, first off, a lot of those larger cities have had way more pain inflicted on them. You're talking about Philadelphia police, NYPD, LAPD.
Yeah.
But not only that, you're just talking about sheer numbers.
Right.
Just being completely
it's
out of
control.
control.
It's a numbers game, yeah. It is.
You get a certain amount of people, and the more and more people that come into that crowd, the more and more anonymous everyone feels.
Right. And my point about bringing in that there's 20, for the amount of people that protested to have, 90% of it peaceful is a success. Now, I'm not minimizing the 21 people that died and the reasons that they died and what happened, but you take one insurrection that happened that was around Stop the Steal, that was told to come to the Capitol the day they were counting the electoral votes. Mm-hmm. And you have 7 people dead from that one protest, thousands of people. And first of all, the Black Lives Matter protest is around an issue that is around people being marginalized systematically, racially, equitably. It's what they're talking about is a fair and free election that went down,
right?
That was challenged in the courts.
Their own party certified.
Old party certified after multiple, 61 attempts at trying to overturn it, and 61 times you've been slapped down. You're not comparing the right things. Mm-hmm. I guess you're comparing protests and riots, sure, but they're completely different things.
Right.
And I don't condone burning of businesses, violence, not really condoning violence. But at the end of the day, what you're seeing in the impeachment, just to get back to the actual parliamentary take on it all, is we don't believe, and tell me if correct me if I'm wrong, but we don't believe they're going to get the 17 votes.
No, absolutely.
But what I think it's about, number one, is getting it on the record and really steeping that day in shame for Trump. I don't think it would be beneficial to the Republicans to have Trump as the guy on the ticket for them at the next election. I just don't think it would be beneficial for them. I don't think they want that as a party.
But at the same time, you could make the other argument that he's probably the only person who could have a chance at winning in 2024. I would argue, because there really isn't any major person in the Republican National Party, or a national figurehead in the Republican Party, who has the sauce to come out and actually give, Biden second term. Or the only way I could see it is if you have a really weak Democrat step up, someone who wasn't that popular, like Kamala Harris, for example, wasn't popular, did terrible in the primaries, but maybe, being asserted as VP now, possibly. Mm-hmm. But if you're talking about a Biden second term, because Mitt Romney won't do it. He won't, because
he's burned too many people.
Well, yeah.
Trumpists.
Well, I was going to say,
too many maggots.
you have 20% of the Republican Party is QAnon now. So are they going to vote for Romney? Right. And I don't know. I think they're in an impossible position, and that's why we can get into the politics of it. I have some critiques of what Democrats chose to highlight procedurally. I'll just gloss over them real quick. I don't want to get into them too crazy, but they focus so much on, again, the video, they did a great job. I wish they focused more on the one line that, that Jamie Raskin was really pushing on the third day, I believe it was, where he was making the case of it didn't even matter, as far as an impeachable offense, it didn't even matter so much that, Trump riled them up, blah, 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 whipped them up, or, the fire in a crowded theater argument. The real issue at hand here is the attack happened on America and he did nothing. Because that is in the oath of office.
Right.
I wish they came out and focused on that a little more and made that the paramount thing. Yeah. Because you even saw some Republicans while they were being interviewed coming out of the chambers in the first few days where they were
disgraceful.
No, a couple of them were the House made, they made some legitimate, if I'm an impartial juror, they're making the argument, they're correct. Yeah. Whether that person making that quote actually votes to impeach Trump is another ballgame, but again, it's the optics, because
it's the optics.
The politics of this is ultimately what's going to move the needle here as far as what's perceived as allowable in the Republican Party going forward. And obviously all these people in this involved right now as jurors are all know like, oh, well, this is an avenue closed to us now, because this isn't like, it's like what we talked about offline. Like, this is the Republican Party's been building to this moment for Trump. What I say the other day, like they built the Iron Man suit for Trump to step into.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? This wasn't people trying to, the Republicans are twisting themselves in knots to still kind of support Trump, but at the same time be like, oh, he's not us. This was unacceptable, blah, blah, blah. But they won't functionally, do anything procedural to make that statement. They'll just say the words, which are meaningless.
Well, critically looking at the election, Republicans did quite well besides Trump.
Right.
You know what I mean? They gained in the House. I mean, they lost the Senate, but it was a close race, and you could argue that Trump almost shot the Republicans in the foot by what he was doing and what he was saying. But I think the Republican Party and their voters are not really fazed at the end of the day with what's happening here at the impeachment. No. Which is why I say, if you're smart Republican, you'll be hoping that Donald Trump goes away.
Right.
Because there's an opportunity, and someone like Adam Kinzinger, who, is a Republican. I forget what state he's out of. He's a congressman somewhere, but he's challenging that, Trump Republican populism. Mm-hmm. And, I heard him being interviewed, and he was talking about how, like, he's there to uphold his oath of office. And that's to, be impartial to what was going on and really, speak out against that. There's an opportunity for a Republican to stand up and kind of claim the Republican Party, have those values around, smaller government, whatever the Republican values are.
Fiscal
responsibility, all of that, and still be out against QAnon and, ridiculousness and just the bluster and everything that came along with Donald Trump. And, I've spoke to you before about how, it's a good idea to have differences of opinion because it progresses people and it invigorates the argument at times. But this presidency and the administration, Trump administration, I guess the previous presidency, was about just completely not listening to facts, making up your own stuff. And that's only going to carry so much water for so long. And this is kind of the end of it, I hope. And my hope is that he'll go away just because he's taken so much shine off of actually moving forward. And people argue that, this isn't healing, this isn't unifying. He has to be held accountable. You can't just do that. This is, if you want to talk about, the parliamentary, procedures of impeachment and kind of what this means for our republic and the Constitution and all that, then you can't let this fly. You can't let that happen and have nobody being held accountable for it. Mm-hmm. That's just my entirety. And I don't know, what the outcome is going to be. I don't know what these depositions are going to bring about. But
I don't see him really moving the needle because, like we said, 67, they're just not going to reach that. But, it's interesting because, obviously, like if he does get convicted, it would preclude him from running for president again. Mm-hmm. He'd be disqualified of all benefits given to former presidents, Secret Service detail, pension, travel allowance, blah, blah, blah. No presidential library, which, let's be real, folks. What? Guy hasn't read a book in decades, probably. And that's like not just me, read all the reports. Like he literally used to like order pictures. Be like, I need a graph, I need pictures, something to look at. Like,
which actually Reagan used to do that too.
Yeah, because they were both idiots.
Right,
yeah.
and they both came from that entertainment background. Yeah. They want to see a movie on what they're supposed to do.
Because they were both dummies.
Yeah.
And they both wanted to see their name in writing. But yeah, so I don't know. I don't see it happening. Like I said, I think that there's some interesting thing. The only real like inside politics stuff I refer to all the time coming out of this is Lindsey Graham obviously voted that he was one of the people who voted that it was unconstitutional to impeach him in the first place. But then coming around on this, what just recently happened, where he voted to allow witnesses to testify. It's interesting because, like I said to you earlier, he was one of the Republicans who initially, on the day of the insurrection, called out Donald Trump. So again, he's still dipping his toe in that water. This is still happening amongst these Republicans, these higher level ones who have presidential aspirations for themselves. Marco Rubio did the same thing. I don't think Mitch McConnell ever would run. I think he's just, for him,
Please God,
for him, his highest aspiration is just to keep being majority leader. And he's obviously gonna have some struggle here. He's having it now, but across the next couple of years to keep his party on his line. And you definitely see that here. But I don't know. I don't see, this isn't going to end with any type of conviction. This is basically just, the Democrats got served up a gift by Trump here on his way out. Obviously, a lot of what happened was horrifying, but he couldn't have done a worse. He possibly could have landed a death blow to the Republican Party here. Not like a complete death blow, but like a paralyzing blow for some time to go forward here. And if Democrats can't capitalize on this, it's going to be disappointing. This should be something that they continue to rag their Republican colleagues with, the ones that they know didn't vote the right way. It should be very easy to campaign against those same folks going forward here. It's a huge ammo dump that they have just sitting on their side, ready to be, a mag ready to be loaded for the next couple of years going forward.
And the reality of all of this is, we've seen 3 impeachments now in our lifetime. Like, this isn't a regular occurrence. We shouldn't be seeing 3 impeachments in our lifetime.
Right.
So what does that tell us? I mean, Clinton got impeached for lying to Congress, essentially. Trump has done that, and he's done that inside out. So the people who try to say, it was a hit job from the start, I was like, well, he made his own bed like multiple times with this. But I don't want to see whether the Republican or Democratic candidates or presidents being impeached, because first of all, it's boring as hell. Boring as hell, and
they're never going to get convicted because you need 67 votes. It's never going to happen.
So there's that, and then it's also like, okay, what could these people be doing?
Right, coronavirus legislation.
Right. I mean, you're doing this in a time where nobody wants to be doing this. I mean, it's great, I guess, for your news media. They love it. It's like their Super Bowl every day to sit there and analyze and talk about it. I mean, I'm doing this begrudgingly because we just have to, because it is historic. First of all, he's the only person to get done 2 times. But I don't foresee him running again anyway, whether he's convicted or not. That's just me personally. And I think Republicans who are smart would want to deter him from doing that anyway. You're better off to bloody try run Don Jr. or someone like that than Trump.
I've seen that there's rumors that he could possibly run for governor in Florida or New York.
No, I could see that.
I could see that.
Laura Trump is also looking
First off, I would love to see him run against Cuomo. Oh, God, please let that happen.
If Cuomo's going to try to run for president, do you know that?
He's been waffling on that. But if all we have left is the spectacle, please at least give me Cuomo v. Trump. Please, I'd love that.
Damn, let's stick a pin in this topic. I'm done with it. I'm done with just listening and talking about Donald Trump.
Yeah.
Like, I've hated this man for a long time before he was president. I keep saying it. I can't believe we've gotten to this point where he's left such a mark in a shit stain in history. Actually, a fake tan stain in history. I can't believe we've got to this point. I can't believe he was president. I believe that the Simpsons really lined it out. They told the future. So yeah, those are our 2 topics that we covered, as well as the quick hits. So the Super Bowl, can we just, for the record, can we get this put in the record? TB12, man. What did you think of the game?
One of the more boring Super Bowls in recent history. I mean, you were right, but technically I was too. Remember, I did say, go back and read watch the
defense will have to play amazing.
I said the defense has to play they didn't score a touchdown, the Chiefs, I nailed that.
It was that front 4.
Yeah, the front 7 was unbelievable. Yeah. And to be fair, like we said, or actually, no, I talked to someone else about this. Both of the Chiefs' starting tackles were out. And they had 2 inexperienced guards as well. And there was actually an interesting stat that came out of it where on 92% of offensive plays, the Chiefs only had a 5-man protection. So they knew going in
Right.
that their O-line was completely decimated.
Yeah.
And only 8% of the time of all snaps they had on offense did they bring in an extra man to even help block while Mahomes was running for his life. So, I mean, that's it. Like, that's the whole game. That right there is the tail of the game.
And he still played some amazing plays that hit wide receivers in the face.
I mean, you can just see that stat and you know how the game was going to win. That's all you really need to see.
And it was funny, you know, the people that ended up getting rings, you know, you've Gronk obviously getting another one. Antonio Brown catching a touchdown.
LaShawn McCoy got 2 rings doing nothing 2 years in a row.
Yeah.
He got one on the Chiefs last year.
He'll have a happy hand with all his rings. But, you know, the question of who the GOAT is right now, I don't think is in question anymore. It's not. I mean, Mahomes is 25. He has won Super Bowl. He's been there twice. To see him get 7 rings, you know, in the parity that is the NFL, I find it very hard to see him catching that.
Yeah.
And people were already talking about him as being, you know, the next. I mean, he's still he'll probably win a couple more.
Probably.
And Brady will probably come back, which, you know, what is he, 42 now?
44, I think.
44?
Yeah, 43, something.
That's
I don't know.
nuts.
Oh, man. Here we go.
And he's MVP.
Here we go. We're still talking about Tom Brady.
Yeah, I mean, this is more important than the impeachment. Or last of all, I guess, did you see him come out of the parade sauced?
Sauce stuff.
He said he had some avocado tequila or something like that. I was like, why are you drinking that?
Oh, yeah. He was.
That was funny, but he deserves that. He deserves it.
Yeah.
Gronk was being Gronk. Florida was being Florida. Nobody was wearing masks. As you cough.
Sorry about that.
But yeah, it was what did you think of the halftime show of the weekend?
I mean, it was okay. His music's just not really live music. You know,
Yeah.
like I like The Weeknd. You know, put some headphones on, chill out. He's got good
atmospheric.
music.
Yeah.
But you know, and like I said, you know, I love the '80s beats that he always incorporates. You know, that's my style. But yeah, it was underwhelming. But it was kind of confusing when like all those people were just running around in the Funhouse mirror room. I was like, what the fuck is that?
There's been some funny memes come from it where he's like, you know, he's the point of view is in his face. He's like,
yeah.
I've seen a few funny memes from
I mean,
that.
but all in all, like it wasn't like the worst. I mean, some people were like, oh, that was the worst. It wasn't the worst. There's been way worse halftime shows than that. It was okay. The commercials were abysmal.
Yeah, I didn't really pay attention much to the commercials.
Well, it was like every other commercial was like, oh, here's a kid who was born without a leg that
slow montage
did a Evil Knievel motorcycle jump, and her parents told her she could do it. Like, what? And then it's like Toyota.
Yeah.
What?
I mean, that's marketing now.
Oh my God. It's just unbearable, man. I honestly, I didn't see one. There were like a couple kind of funny ones, but
the streaker. Did you see?
Oh yeah. I saw
he
that.
bet money on himself. Did you read about that?
No.
So he put a bet on. There was a prop bet that if there was a streaker, you know, I guess he put like 10 grand on it. He won $375,000.
Wow.
Bailed himself out, and I don't know if he's going. I don't know how that'll work out. Will he be able to collect on that? Is that some sort of insider trading?
Yeah,
or what?
is that cheating? I don't know.
I mean, if the bet's there, I don't see any problem with it.
Oh man.
But
I don't know. It was just all that build up to
Let's go
Fest Super Bowl.
I mean, that's probably the second best thing that could have happened for me as a Patriots fan is to see Gronk and Brady get another ring.
Some nostalgia.
Yeah.
All right. Congratulations.
Yep. I think it's another ring for me. All right, lads and lasses. Thanks for listening. Like I said, we're going to have another one next week. Try to do it every week. Go over some hot topics as well as main topics. You know, listen to this. Please share it on however you listen to your podcast, whether it be Spotify, Apple Podcasts. What other ones are there?
There's Anchor, Castbox. There's a bunch of them on there. They're all listed on the pages.
Yeah, so please show some support. Give us some feedback. We'll be having guests on soon.
Oh, yeah.
Whether it'll be virtually or in office here.
Yeah, we're cooking it up.
Yep. All right, guys. Thanks for listening.